What's up, folks? Darren here from Push Black, welcoming you back to Black History Year. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to let y'all in on a little secret. Lately, I've been wondering, what's the real deal with history? I mean, sure, yeah, I'm the host of a history podcast. I should already know, right? But just hear me out. Is history really as straightforward as we make it out to be? Don't you ever wonder who decides which stories make the cut, whose narratives get the spotlight, and who decides what's deemed worthy of preservation when it comes to our people and culture? We all know how Black history across the globe has been swiped, twisted, and rewritten by colonialism. But how is this being challenged? How can we make sure our stories aren't just fabricated footnotes in someone else's tale? Our guest today, Kamau Ware, has some thoughts on that front. Now, Kamau is not your average historian. He's also a visual artist and founder of the groundbreaking Black Gotham Experience, also known as BGX. Through historic walks across the Big Apple, photography-based graphic novels, and unique events, BGX shines a light on the massive impact of the African diaspora. As a storyteller extraordinaire, Kamau is rewriting the rules of preserving Black history, and he's here to drop some insights that will have you looking at history in new and interesting ways, y'all. What's up, fam? Before we dive into the episode, I have one small favor to ask. Please spread the word about Black History Year on social media. Podcasting is competitive, y'all, and the best way to grow is through your promotion. You can shout out this episode or share one lesson from it you found super interesting. Just tag us at We Are Push Black on Instagram and TikTok so more folks can access the Black history they didn't teach us in school. Your support means the world to us, and your minute of effort makes our hours of work worth it. So thank you, fam. Now, let's get back to the show. What's up, Kamau? How you doing today, man?
Bruh, it's like nice and sunny down here in the seaport. We look out the window, we see ships, we see water. We're on the east side of Manhattan, which is the same side of the island that many Black folks were brought to be forced laborers in these territories. So we like being on the east side, facing the continent, right by the water, to keep ourselves in tune. So yeah, it's good to be here.
All right. Thank you for setting the space and the tone for us today. Before we dive into your rich history, your rich background, and the work that you're doing, we like to begin all of our conversations with the same question. Essentially, we want to know, Kamau, what does Black liberation look like for you?
Black liberation is not having to think about Black liberation, because it's just like it's just baked into the existence. Like birds don't be wondering like how to fly; they just do it.
Yeah.
And I think that part of Black liberation can be an ongoing question, an ongoing thing for us to consider when moving up and down the timeline.
Absolutely. Black liberation is not having to hold on to that concept or think about it anymore, because we can live and be free.
Yeah.
So let's dive right on into it. Kamau, we want to know more about your journey into history. Even before on Black New York, we want to begin today's convo talking about griots, because when I think about your work, I'm very much reminded of the griot tradition. And for listeners unfamiliar with the term, griots are traditional West African storytellers who played a crucial role in preserving their history and cultural heritage. And they've been doing this for centuries, y'all. So they blend music, oral storytelling to bring life to the histories of their people. And, we can find many griots still today, not just Kamau, but also on the continent in West Africa. So we think about the Mande people, the Fula, the Hausa, Songhai, and many, many more. Kamau, I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about your understanding of what a griot is, their responsibility to their communities, and how do you see your own work overlapping with this tradition?
Man, you're kind of hitting a nerve without knowing it, because we don't have like years of friendship, but it's good to be building one now. But I actually just came back from Mali in February because my fiance's father passed away. And part of what I've heard from her is like the role that griots play in weddings, and how usually both people who are getting married are going to have a griot who almost is like the like living CV of the person. Like, this person has this kind of background, and they get paid to like come to these different kind of ceremonies to it's like imagine like if Saul Williams showed up as like your CV.
Oh my god.
So it's kind of like
Wow.
someone just like getting, she clack clack. Darren D does this. You know what I'm saying? And so there is a very real archival sentiment around griots as storytellers and preservers of history, but also it was powerful to see in the ceremony of her father who passed away, people speaking Bambara more than French, just like telling stories about her father and about Islam and about what it means to bury this amazing man. And that was just like a month ago. You know what I'm saying? And
Wow.
so when I think about griots, I think that in the oral tradition, you want to get it from the ground, you know? And that's part of what happens when you speak to people whose heart is in the same zip code or same visible space as you. I often don't necessarily always get acknowledged for certain practices that we've been doing with Black Gotham Experience because it's on the street and it's ephemera. So you speak something
Mhm.
and then it's boom in the air. But I do think that sometimes it's funny when people who are more in the academic tradition, who publish their work, who publish and archive and memorialize their findings, will become the thing that people refer to. You know what I'm saying? And I
Mm.
don't, I don't, I don't have a problem with that. But I just noticed that over time, I've never thought about that as a position to work through or against. But often, when you are with the people and you're speaking in real time versus writing it down and getting it published, the people who know you did it were there, and those who weren't there don't
Yeah,
know.
absolutely.
It's intimate. It's
Absolutely.
intimate.
Well, before we dive deep into the Black Gotham experience, I want to know what attracted you personally to history. Was there a story you came across that you felt that you needed to dig deeper into that kind of piqued your interest in history?
Mm,
And related to that, I'm super curious, Kamau, at what point did you begin to understand your own self as a historian?
mm. Those are two powerful lanes. Um,
Mhm.
I would say a friend of mine, his name is Jason. He's from Florida, and he's up here in Brooklyn. He's a close homie. I've known him for like I don't know, damn, 20 years. And I remember when he explained to me synesthesia. He's a musician, and he was like, "Well, I can hear color. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? So like when I see certain colors, I hear them." He's like, yes, it's called synesthesia. Like some artists have it. Like sometimes, a person who's a chef will like look at certain ingredients and they can taste them just by looking at them. And the
Yeah.
more he began to talk about synesthesia, and I found there's a lot of people who are creators where the way that the brain is wired, one stimulation affects another and they become equated. And so I say that to say that ever since I was a kid, for me, reading was not just about taking the words off a page and understanding what's being said. I've always thought that part of reading was taking what's read and then creating like a whole episodic movie in your mind. Everything, fiction and nonfiction. I thought that was literacy.
Mm.
It isn't until probably in my 40s that I began to realize that like everybody can't smell words when they read them. Like when I read certain things, it's already like turning into a whole full body
Wow.
experience. And for me, that was what words did. And then I began to realize that there's certain things that I would read that's nonfiction that will put me in those moments. And some of that was empathy. But my fascination with history in part just goes back to my childhood when there's things that I would read that were like nonfiction that were hella exciting. And then I would read
Yeah.
things that were fiction, but at the same time, you know, if a real person who's a nonfiction historical figure, are their dreams fiction? You know what I'm saying? It's like
Mm.
the whole nonfiction versus fiction thing was always a weird binary of what's real because for creatives, which you can imagine is real. And so I always saw history as an imaginative space.
Mm.
And if anything, often what was considered nonfiction, which would have been considered like less sexy, less interesting, was more interesting because it was something that had a legacy in the real world that you can kind of go and find. You know what I mean? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's like so that's one lane. And as an artist and as a creative, I was really allergic to the notion of being considered a historian, but I kept being called a historian. And I remember the first time I did a walking experience for a college group and the professors were there. I was nervous. And then I kept checking in with the professors to see if they had any kind of feedback on my delivery or my history. And just more and more professors would say, the academy teaches us to dumb down our ability to
Mm.
emote. The academy teaches us to be tethered to the empirical. And when
Mm.
you encourage people to be empathetic and imaginative and center themselves in their own body as a way to understand the historical moment or to explore it, they say that's how we wish we could teach. But the academy doesn't support that. And so a lot of professors have been coming to Black Gotham Experience as a way to just sauce up their syllabi. And so I was resistant historian until historians was just kind of like, please consider yourself a historian because we would like to welcome you into this group and we honor how you do it. And so historian doesn't mean you have letters. Historian just means you know what you're talking about.
Oh, you dropped so many jewels there. Let me try and navigate this, Kamau, for the audience. You open up a huge can of worms when you talk about this thin line between like fiction and nonfiction. And I often encounter this when I encounter like historical works as well. What we're about to dig a little bit into before we
Mm-hmm.
talk is about the Black Gotham experience is historiography. So,
Mm-hmm.
historiography, for our audience who's not familiar with that term, is really about the construction of history, how that's put together, because we don't often think that somebody had to put these events, these moments, these persons in conversation with one another. But I love when you spoke about the aesthetic or the creative dimensions of this, the imaginative dimensions of this, because so much of history really feels like storytelling. Just my end, it just seems you can't separate that.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about the griot tradition, their use of art, so aesthetics, music, dance, right? Um, I guess what I really want to ask and bringing all that up is, what do you think aesthetics lends to the teaching of history, the
Mm-hmm.
understanding of, in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think aesthetics is nature,
Mm.
and nature is the model, and we are a part of nature. And when trying to understand the way humans interpret, digest, or contemplate a particular thing, you can ask yourself, like, why are we drawn to certain flowers and smells? You know what I'm saying? Why does it smell of like, fresh rain on rock? Why is that pleasant? You know what I'm saying? Why does certain food smell good to us? As an educator, I have a background in teaching. I know there's a big jump between like picture books and chapter books. And for me, it's like, well, letters are pictures too. Like somebody had to make sound look a certain kind of way and put those things together. And so I like typography. I think that typography is a very foxy aesthetic, how different letters could be presented. And so in my mind, those bifurcations aren't there. It's like it's just how I perceive it. I think that even looking at religion, um, I grew up in a Christian household. My parents were of the Nation of Islam, like before I was born. I got friends who are Muslim, Buddhist, and no matter what sacred house of worship you walk into, there's aesthetics. You know what I'm saying? And if you're at, whether you're in Senegal or Mali, like the call of prayer is an aesthetic. Um, you know, uh, Bilal, the original singer of the call to prayer in Islam, like he hit it a certain kind of way. And, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
And the prophet was
yeah.
like, "Bro, you rolling with us." And so I think that aesthetics is not something that should be dumbed down or unappreciated. It's like what religion, what idea, what nation can attract human beings without flags and crowns and crests and songs and books and paintings and
Mhm.
poetry. And the aesthetics attract the human soul. And even just language itself and preparing meals and even how
Mm,
we walk. All those are different aesthetic considerations. And so I think that we are an aesthetically inclined species. And to try to separate aesthetics from life and truth and space is like what you going to do. Even the stars are lit. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
the
yeah.
moon and the sun is and was better than the magic hour, right? So what we live in an aesthetic space. Like the universe is a big ass gallery, you know?
Makes me think about the recent news report that the sun, scientists are now saying like the sun may have consciousness, but don't want to tangentially jump down that rabbit hole. I want to call out what you mentioned around how important it is to emote when we
Yeah.
think about history storytelling and just the importance of aesthetics, just to put a cap on it. Like history is not just what happened, right? It's how folks felt and how it impacts us, how we
Hmm.
feel, right?
I feel like we probably read the same book before. Michelle Ralph Trullo, Science in the Past. You
Absolutely,
hip to that?
absolutely.
You hip to that work?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Have you ever heard the film version of that? Oh, that was
By
epic. That
Raoul Peck.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Sound, yeah, yeah. That is fascinating. I've taught a class at the new school where me and my co-teacher Benoit, we had like about 5 or 6 books the first semester, and then the second time we taught, I was like, bro, we need a book, and it was
Yes.
Michelle Ralph Trullo, which is very dense. It's a very, small looking book. You might think it's like a quick read, but those paragraphs be doing things. But at the end of the
Yes.
day, I just tell folks like think about history like Broadway. You know what I'm saying? You got Broadway, you got off Broadway, you got off Broadway. Broadway got the
Mm-hmm.
budget, got the stage, got the audience, got the eyes. And so
Mm,
you might be like, yo, D read some archives and he has something he wants to say. And maybe it's a gram, it's a podcast, whatever. But somebody else can take their narrative and they got museums, they got street names, they got
yeah.
statues. And so when we look at what you're saying versus what somebody else is saying, you might come across as radical or different because you don't have the budget to put up the museum or the statue. But it doesn't mean that
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying is less archivally backed or less empirical. And so I
Yes,
think that
indeed.
understanding that history is production, that looking at history is not just what happened, what people say happened.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yo, this only really underscores the importance of the work you're doing through the Black Gotham Experience. Come on, if you could just share a bit about its origins, its
Mm-hmm.
goal, and in particular, doing some research on the Black Gotham Experience. I'm wondering if you could speak about the specific anecdote that
Mm.
kind of seeded this idea for you.
Yeah, I think that one of my colleagues and friends, we were discussing the origin story of Black Gotham Experience, and he was like, "Well, if it wasn't for a young black girl, we wouldn't be here." And I think that society ignores children, ignores black people, ignores women. And you were
Mm,
somewhere in your 30s and you were not jaded enough to not understand that this young black girl had um, value and had substance. And I come from teachers, I come from readers. And I knew as an educator, a trained educator, that one of the best ways to track if somebody's following you or with you or in discussion with you is if they have questions or comments. And so to put it on the timeline, it's the spring of 2008. I've been in New York now for about 2 years. And I'm working at the Tenement Museum in the Lower East Side, who now has a Black History program. But for some time, people would go to that museum and hear about people who lived in the tenements in the Lower East Side, which were predominantly Jewish, German, Italian people, 19th century. And so I'm working there and I enjoy stories. And so I can talk about Italian people, Jewish people, German people with a degree of flair and finesse because I love a good
yeah.
story, period. And so before I knew a lot of the Black history that I wanted to find out, I knew more about European history in New York. And so these bus loads that came in that particular spring, 2008, had some black students from Brooklyn, where I lived at the time and still live, and just one of those children. It's a middle school group. I imagine she was like about 12, she asked a question after a 90-minute experience looking at German, Jewish, and Italian history in the Lower East Side. And her only question was, where's the black people? And my son was about her age at the time. And when I ran back through my brain, and I was like, so it's been 90 minutes. I didn't mention one black fact. And this child, who I thought was maybe not getting it, was just kind of getting it on another level and was
Mm.
waiting for me to do my basic ability to like explain their role, black people's role in the creation of New York. And I found her question was not necessarily like, yo, show me on the map where black people are. But where were the black people was like, where is the black experience in this story of New York City, of the founding of America? And I just took that to heart and I answered the question as best as possible, but I also made it my business to not get caught off guard by some other brilliant, well watered child to come for me like that. And I began to like incorporate parts of black history into stories about New York. And I just found like people were interested in that. And I was like, all right, um, as an entrepreneur and as a creative, I don't quite know how this fits as me being a photographer and a visual artist, but I'm gonna create something that gives people an opportunity to have a conversation about the black history of New York, the same way
Mm.
I've been able to be in service to conversations about German, Jewish, and Italian stories in New York. If I could be a black person telling Jewish history in New York, certainly more than black people will be interested in hearing about the black origins because that is one of the older narratives in this territory.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Kamau.
Mm-hmm.
You say that, when she asked this question, this little girl, this profound question, it wasn't a question of geography.
Mm-hmm.
It was a question of identity.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that? What's the relationship between identity and history?
Well, I think that one is a little bit more personal. Like I think that the greatest human archive that exists is the human body. The idea of individuality is an illusion on your pathway to consciousness, right?
Mhm.
Like we all, as I like to think about it aesthetically, poetically, is that we all have a drum from our ancestors, right? That's our heartbeat, and it's really unique to our bodies. And when the music stops, that's it. You know what I'm saying? Like we can live without our brain functioning, but
Mhm.
if a person dies and the cause is unbeknownst to the medical team, they say they had a cardiac arrest because the last thing to go is the heart, right? And I feel
Ooh.
like at birth, the hearts and the lungs somehow miraculously just changed jobs. You know what I'm saying? The heart and the lungs, like, all right, you ready? Now you do this and I'm gonna do the other thing. And then we come and then we take our first breath until our last breath, our heart and our lungs got it figured out. And so
Mhm.
I think that the human body holds not just that drum, but it holds in our DNA, in our blood, and water. Our bodies are mostly water, and water is older than the planet Earth. Water didn't start here on this planet.
Ooh.
You know what I'm saying? Water can be found throughout the galaxy. It's so fundamental to life that we play ourselves by thinking that water came from here. Water's been outside. You know what I'm saying? And so when I think
Mhm.
about identity, I think about how does one person have a sense of who they are in their own body.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? And I think that a lot of times we separate ourselves from the world around us, but that separation to some degree is necessary and it plays a role in our evolution as a species. But when you think about history, it can be like, word, I'm gonna read a book about the Japanese people during the samurai period, or I'm going to find out about the Dravidians, you know what I'm saying, and why different people are different shades in the country of India, or I'm going to study about, Mansa Musa. Like that might be different historical topics, right?
Mhm.
But identity is like, how does this live in my body? How do
Mm.
I find a way to connect with the outside world? And I think that's part of what has been a contested space for Black people is the budget that wants to tell us who and what we are is typically one that has an agenda that does not necessarily have our favor. And so we have to find a way to alchemize that signal, create our own signals, connect with
Mm-hmm.
others, and create our own networks of understanding. And so that little girl was just kind of like, all right, bro, it's a field trip, but my classmates are black, my teachers are black, and you black. And so, based on how I was raised, I'm expecting you to have some signal for me.
Yes,
And I
yes,
didn't,
indeed.
and I wasn't given that signal. You know what I'm saying? And I think that she's a child, but children are elders too. You know what I mean? The oldest
Yeah.
version of ourselves is our childhood self. And so even though she's a child, I saw her as like a grandma in that situation. And she was kicking game to me that I needed to listen to. You know what I mean? That was a moment of constant illumination. And I think I would have missed it if I didn't understand better, you know?
I want to give folks, just a taste of the reimagining that happens in the Black Gotham Experience. I'm wondering, Kamau, if you could share like any surprising or important stories from your research when you were building the Black Gotham Experience
Mm-hmm.
that really resonated with you, or more importantly, any surprising facts or stories that really challenged the way that you even understood New York City.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say for one, it's just I'm gonna share two. For one, is just understanding the territory as just a sacred space. Period.
Mm,
I think that we think about who in the human side of life occupies a space. And I think there's a lot of land acknowledgments about acknowledging that this was Lenape before it was a New Netherland or New York City, and that the land was not taken in just terms.
yeah.
But when you sit and you talk to American indigenous people, a lot of what they speak about is like the water, you know what I'm saying, and the territory and the sacredness of the space that they're occupying. And I think that part of what really has been a big part of me appreciating the territories is a degree of just like fascination with just like the fact that there are parts of rock in this
Mm,
territory that date back to the Ice Age. To think about this like nook that becomes just part of North America, how you can see how it can fit, you know what I'm saying, right into the continent. And understand that
yeah.
there are parts of rock in this territory that go back to Pangea. To think about the Mohican Tuck, known as the Hudson, that flows in two different directions. And then there's a twin, East River on the other side, that goes right into the ocean. Just like from a standpoint of like celebrating water and rock and elements and the heavens above us. And that's a way of just kind of like being humble enough in studying indigenous practices, African and American indigenous, to understand that part of what anybody needs to do looking at history is understanding that we live in a world that already has a history that doesn't take 12 months to form a unit of time, that we're living
Mm-hmm.
in a space that is just really that is an elder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, the second thing that has been a big eye opener for me, because I think we've all kind of grown up with this celebration of the founding fathers and how they were able to fight against the British, and to a certain degree is one of those like undeniable things. Like, all right, well, I can't hate. You know what I'm saying? Y'all fought against King George III. Y'all got this country popping. Y'all have done some things along the way that are questionable, very questionable. But it's like, you fought that war, you got the territory. War is war. It's challenging. But when you begin to understand that the timeline of resistance against the monarch didn't begin with the founding fathers, if anything, they're kind of like the Macklemores of hip hop, and that the founding fathers of this rebellious energy existed with people that look more like you and I.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just gives you a different entry point when you're talking about anybody's flag. Some flags are new, some flags are old, but Black resistance is older than a lot of flags. You know what I'm saying?
I super appreciate the ways in which you mobilize indigenous epistemologies, ways of thinking about knowledge, creating knowledge from the way that you spoke about the land and how you use that to kind of remap or reimagine space. It's absolutely something that we can use to kind of reclaim subjugated histories today. Like, how did our ancestors think
Right.
about the land, right?
Right.
We use that to navigate today. Absolutely.
Like we're always home, and that's a powerful thing.
Mm,
And like when we look at the human experience, and we can track the forced migration of our ancestors or the forced migration of African people, um, that is equally true as the fact that Black people have been traveling this planet before that. You know what I'm saying?
mm,
It's equally true that no matter where I go in this on this on this planet, you know what I'm saying? When I see the sunset, when I see the sunrise, it's like I'm home. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so all those things can be true at the same time. We hold people to account to what they've done to Black people in the form of getting like cigarettes and sweet tea and cake, you know, and wealth for themselves. At the same time, we can hold them accountable. We can hold ourselves accountable for how we treat each other now, but also understand that no matter where we end up on this planet, we're home. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
This is our, we're here on this planet for a reason. And we are in conversation with it, with our bodies. And yeah, like, you know, how we breathe and how our breath affects the world around us, how melanin absorbs the sun rays to keep the planet cool. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like we're always home, and nobody has the right to dictate how we heal from our human experience. And so I think the healing arts is central to being a griot, to being a storyteller, to being a good listener, that everybody's on their path, everybody's on their journey, everybody's special, and everybody deserves the room to be able to find their way and navigate their path. And nobody can stop our healing. That's the beautiful part about understanding where we are right now is that no matter how many books you ban, you're not going to stop the natural process of the sun rising or the earth spinning or people realizing who they are, especially if you've been lied to. All that has an expiration date, just like any season. You know what I'm saying? Every season you can't have, yeah. So I'm not trying to preach. I'm just saying like,
Oh no, we appreciate it. We
yeah, it's
appreciate
just and all that is in the African diaspora. You know what I'm
it.
saying?
Hmm.
All those spiritual lessons, all those elements of wisdom and being grounded. You know, looking at, you know, women's stories, queer stories, biracial stories, you know, religious stories, all of that is a part of the story of people from Europe forcing Black people to cross these oceans, and those people having to realize who they are. All of that is in there. You really don't have liberation without some kind of spiritual insight.
You spoke just now about queer history, women's history, and just so many different kind of subjugated histories.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me wonder, just in your own process, prepping for the Black Gotham experience and different iterations, how do you decide what stories to include?
That's a great question. I think the answer is simple, but I can expand it. One is that we create a community.
Mm,
Every walk that we give is like a little focus group. You know what I'm saying? We're hearing in real time what people think about what we're creating, and there's a response. And so we learn from every community. Every walk that we give, we learn. I would say that I've learned more from people I've talked to on these walks than I had from any single book, because we're
wow.
living history. And people who want to come to these conversations, such as yourself, imagine if you and I didn't meet through this platform, but you just kind of happen to pull up and take a walk. You would like listen a lot. You probably would talk less than I would, but your questions and your insights and your considerations would add to that circle in a way that I'm gonna walk away from that, not just as somebody who shared, but somebody also who received. You follow?
Hmm. All right. Yo, Kamau, I want to know about the Buffalo Sonnet Project. It's a
Word.
new comic inspired by San Juan Hill. What can you tell
Mm-hmm.
me about this work?
Now it's cool you're asking about that because I'm actually in the gallery for BGX, and there's members of the team in the room that worked on that. People like
Oh, cool.
Issa and Suede.
Another one.
And the Buffalo Sonnet was something that I feel was bubbling up in me for some time. I did a card reading from somebody who had like some like Native American wisdom tarot cards. I got like the white buffalo that came up. I also love the song by Bob Marley, Buffalo Soldier. And
No.
so it's like a play on words, Buffalo Sonnet or Buffalo Soldier. But one of my like holy grail projects is a graphic novel series that's interprets the history of our core 5 walks that are all based here in New York City. And so it's Other Side of Wall Street, Sarah's Fire, Caesar Rebellion, Citizen Hope, and the State of Mirrors. And they
Mm.
more or less go like from 1624 to like 1883, but the backstories go back further. And so to get a graphic novel cadence down where you have like the visuals that's based on photography, that just like takes a lot of like R&D to get right. And we were able to get this commission with Lincoln Center, and they were like, what do you want to work on? And I was like, I'd love to do a digital comic book about San Juan Hill. And so we just had like enough resources to really invest in like a dream team and figured out the cadence for that. And so Buffalo Sonnet is a multiple layered narrative. I would say even beyond the Easter egg, there's a conversation there about San Juan Hill, about spirituality, about displacement. And at the end of the day, it's my current best example of the work that I do
Ooh.
that is historical, aesthetic, scholarly, but also has a spiritual component in it too. Because the Buffalo Sonnet, which is sonnet is 14 lines, those 14 lines are indeed a prayer for African diaspora children who've been
Wow.
displaced by violence. And so it's a comic book, but it's also meant to be a form of like contemporary sacred text, something that we can actually lean into and meditate on to address violence that we carry with us as displaced people through force.
This makes me think about how accessible you make history through aesthetics.
Mm,
And this whole episode is about reclaiming our histories. And
mm-hmm.
we really want to inspire like a sense of agency in the audience. We want them to feel like they too can be historians.
Well, I think we should revisit the idea of being a pack rat. I've been called a pack rat before. I
Yeah.
think people should reconsider nostalgia. I often keep movie tickets, programs. I think the whole idea of an artifact is something that doesn't have to be old.
Mm,
The term artifact isn't qualified by anything that's temporal. An artifact is like something that's mass produced that speaks to a time period. And
mm,
so when I've often given talks about what Black Gotham Experience does, especially visualizing and breathing life into the archive by showing depictions of people that are often not a part of the archive, is to consider what's in their purse, what's in their wallet, and to explain that, your Metro card, your driver's license, like those are artifacts. And
mm,
Spike Lee has had an exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum where he showcased memorabilia and things he's been collecting. Um, Swiss and Alicia got an exhibition up right now, also showing their art collection. And you also have like the Aussie Louis D collection is now held at the Schomburg. I think that we should just appreciate that we're all historic actors.
mm.
Everybody's special, nobody's ordinary. Everybody had to go through a miraculous process to arrive on this planet. And if you are looking at how do you become a historian, one of the most important things to be an expert in is yourself. And so, like, what do you collect about your own life? How are you preserving it over time?
Mm,
Are you how are you storing these different aspects of your own existence? I also think it's important to, talk to your elders, talk to your peers, be historians, be archives of each other. I like to think about the people in my close circle, in my close intimate relationships, that we are each other's record. You know what I mean?
mm,
If somebody were to ask about certain folks, I could step forward and say, well, here's what I know where I've collected about that person. So I think that we are all each other's caretakers. And so I think that activating the notion of being a historian, not from the standpoint of like pursuing a study, but just in a way of like embracing yourself and appreciating your own life and the people that you're blessed to have in community. to be able to be like, word, down from like birth dates, knowing you sign, things you do together, like collect where you at. You know what I'm saying? Because all those are little artifacts, and they're only going to become more valuable as time, do what it do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, fam. I just got two more questions for you. One is going to be a little bit of a stick, and one is going to hopefully inspire a little bit of fun. Let me get into
I
the stick.
love fun. I'm here for fun.
Okay, okay. Um, so I love the practical tips that you just shared with our folks. Absolutely
Hmm.
cohering objects around ourselves. Our bodies are an archive, as you mentioned earlier. Yes, indeed. But I'm curious, some institutions, gatekeeping institutions, believe there's a right way and wrong way of doing history.
Hmm.
I, I'm thinking now about the social media space. How many folks are now
Mm.
reporting their own personal narratives? And what I really want to ask here, Kamal, is not like, is social media good for like history creation, preserving our stories? Absolutely believe it is. But do you think there's potentially a conflict in too many perspectives? So, for instance, um, just right now in this country, there's an attack on DEI initiatives, teaching Black history in schools because they believe this perspective uh, undercuts the master narrative of this country. But also thinking
Hmm.
about it at a much more personal level, when we talk about Black history, um, too often there's certain marginalized identities, certain marginalized subjugated histories that are excluded outside of Black history as well. So,
Hmm.
what do you think about just social media, its capacity to offer just innumerable perspectives? And do you feel like it's a good or bad thing?
Well, I think that you have to just have some grounding and some navigational guidelines. There's a lot of noise out there.
Mm,
I think it's interesting that in this epoch we're in right now, the role that social media plays is like this, like real kind of like funky bridge. Sometimes you have to like, travel down a mudslide to get to clean water, right?
yes, yeah.
And I think that we don't own these platforms and social media.
Mm,
Um, and I think that they also have their agenda, and like you got to post, like they're basically making us a part of their business model. They incentivize us. They say we're going to help you reach more people, but in the process, here's what we need in order for you to really kind of play in that part of the pool. And so I think that it's a bit of a, it's a bit of a mixed bag. But so is language. You know what I'm saying? There ain't but so much you can say. Certain things you have to just like feel and get energetically. And it's the same thing with cognition. You know, you can like know all the history in the world, but it may not actually make you a better human being unless you
mm,
do some wellness too. And so I think that social media has a place, but I do think that it's not intended or designed for liberation. And so
mm,
I think that it's one of those kind of waters, you know, it's cool to visit and pull up, but like don't live in it. Like don't make social media be the entire manner in which you communicate with your people. And we have our longest running event is Nerdy Thursdays, where we use social media to say, yo, come to Nerdy Thursdays. We do a newsletter, but like if Instagram broke or MailChimp broke, you know what I'm saying? We still can contact our people and say, we're going to be holding space right here by the river at Black Gotham Experience, like Black folk have been doing for the past almost 400 years. And so,
yeah, community.
and
Yeah.
that's where the oral tradition comes in, because social media is not the oral tradition. It's a bunch of thumbs acting up sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Which I think
Yep.
is kind of funny when you think about like how us walking and getting off our hands and knees to be able to have hands to make stuff, and how our thumbs play a big role in our articulation in the arts. It's funny that here we are, I feel almost going backwards with our thumbs.
Ooh, ooh, that's a word. Okay. All right. Just one last question. This is gonna be fun. I promise you. We'll transition on up out of here. What I want to know, Kamal, as we talk about the future, you know, we study use history to not only know ourselves, to understand how we got here, also potentially plot a way forward, right?
Mm,
I want to know from your perspective, Kamal, if you were the head of the Department of Education in this country,
mm,
how would history
mm.
be taught?
Yeah, well, when I was studying to become an educator, the word that I came across that was new to my vocabulary, I didn't quite get it in undergrad, was pedagogy.
Ooh,
And I remember people like, I remember asking the professors, like, So what is pedagogy? And well, it's the art of teaching. It's the science of teaching. And I'll come across it in books about classroom management and talk about how you have to have routines and token economy, and you have to control the weather in the room, and how you have to scaffold. And all this is under the umbrella of pedagogy. And then I found out in part through my reading and through my travels is that pedagogy, actually broken down, is it means to lead with the foot. Like PED in pedagogy, like PED in pedicure. And the
Wow.
agogy means to lead. And so, like, the actual truest meaning of pedagogy is to be outside and to make sense out of the world. And that goes back to the Roman times, where people that were like nannies or caretakers of children of like noble folks or like well off, they were often really well educated. And the pedagogue was actually almost like a temporal slave state, where they were like, under the control of a particular family or household, but they were smart. And so the goal was like, all right, we have this nanny or this, professor under our control. And because the Roman Empire was kind of dangerous, it was like, hey, we need you to travel with our children from place to place. And
Wow.
part of what the pedagogue would do with those children is educate them, not in the classroom, not sitting down, not just be quiet, not read this and spit out what you remember, but we're going to move through the world, and by leading with the foot, I'm going to educate you and frame up what's going on and ask you questions, and so it's real time, or
Mhm.
it's the oral tradition. It's not like here goes a test. Now I know you're smart, and
The,
so
the,
I think that if we just get back to the roots of what pedagogy really is, I think we'd be outside a lot more. I think being outside also means that we should actually have, if I had a magic wand and I'm running the education department,
mhm.
I would push for us to have a secretary of education on like a level that is similar to, you know, one that can reach down into like the states. I feel like for the most part through Title One, we can reach into the state. That's a federal program,
Mhm.
but we actually don't like have we don't really have like a secretary of heritage, so to speak,
Ooh.
right? I know that Japan and Canada have a secretary of like heritage or culture, and because we don't have that here in this country, you can have one state be like, we're banning these books, another state saying we ain't teaching this, because it's a kind of like a free for all. But that free for all doesn't really benefit the country as a whole. If anything, it makes it easier to say, I got the budget for my life,
The,
right? And so I
yeah,
think that pedagogy and learning really should be in conversation with the public square and with heritage, so that we're really learning when we're just like doing the most basic things, like not just sitting in a room, but going from place to place.
yo, that's so powerful. For so many reasons, it just brings me back to the brilliance of the Black Gotham Experience, because this is like that. That's literally what it is, right? It's pedagogy.
It's
You walk
experience. It's experience. Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
They've
And
been.
that's how all of our ancestors learned. If you're a human being right now, museums are new on the human scene. You know what I'm saying? Classrooms as we have them today, a lot of things that we have were so we take for like, oh yeah, this is how you do it. All that is new. But what's
Yeah,
old is people walking together in their community, making sense out of the world, not just the insects, but the stars, you know? And we got to get into that.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that final word, fam.
I want to thank you and for those who've watered you on your journey for being a gracious, hospitable host. It's a pleasure to meet you through screens. I hope to see you one point in time in the same room.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, thanks for what y'all do for Black media. And if y'all get to New York, you'll holla at a player. And, DC ain't too far, you know?
absolutely, absolutely.
That was artist, historian, and walker Kamau Ware with the Black Gotham Experience. To learn more about BGX, visit blackgotham.com. And remember, in the face of historical revisionism and cultural appropriation, we have the power to reclaim, defend, and uphold the authentic narratives of our ancestors, of our community. It all starts by simply telling your story. What story can you share that starts this work? Reflect on that until next week. Be free. You're living in history. At Push Black, we agree with Marcus Garvey when he said, a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture It's like a tree without roots. We believe telling empowering stories on Black life and history can build a more liberated Black future. Being here with us lets us know you probably feel like that's important too. You matter. Your choice to be here matters. It lets us know that you value this work, and you make Push Black happen with your contributions at blackhistoryyear.com. Most people do $5 or $10 a month, but everything makes a difference. Thank you for supporting the work.